So, good evening. My name is Artem. I'm a product engineer at SuperNova, and today I'm going to talk about what kind of challenges we had during the implementation process of Flutter Exporter, and basically a quick overview of how it works under the hood. So, let's get to it. First of all, let me briefly cover what all has to happen in order for us to give you the Flutter code. First of all, we have to take all your components that you have created in SuperNova and convert them into widgets. After that, we have to add the animations on top of the widgets. Then we are laying out the widgets with the Flexbox containers. And lastly, we are exporting all the actions, connections, and so on. The first step is the Flutter widget. Here on the left, you have an example of what it looks like. It's a small label example. Basically, what we do is we take your SuperNova component, generate widgets out of them, and then wrap it into container or box decoration to add all the styling that you apply to your components in SuperNova. And currently we are using material widgets with future plan on adding Cupertino widgets as well. Next step is exporting animations. As Yichi has mentioned, we use, when it's needed, our own implementation of Flutter animations object, of Flutter animations definition object, which is called interpolation. You can see it right there. But I'll cover that a little bit later. Right now, what I was going to say is that we are generating the animated widgets into a separate class and then inject them into your screens. So that they can have the definition of the animation inside of them. And the generated class also provides you with a way how to inject your animation controller from the screen. So you can set stuff like duration, call forward, reset, etc. Next step is the layout. As you know, the Flutter framework uses Flexbox concept, which is a container-based layout system. And we use your component positions and all the layout rules that you've defined inside SuperNova in order to infer all the rows and columns and stacks in order to position all the widgets, and then we apply wrappers like align, positioned, and container with agent sets in order to make the responsiveness rules enforced. Next and last step is adding interactivity, which is pretty simple. We just take all the buttons and bar icons and implement the on-press handler in those. Those serve as invokers of the navigation roads and trigger animations, of course, provided that you have created navigation roads and animations previously in Studio. Also, based on settings of your export process, those are the actions that might or might not happen as you set it up, which are basically the Flutter project export. You can either get the whole Flutter project, or just the files. It's based on your trace, or you can get the assets from your Sketch or XD file, or you can also get the localization files. So, as you might have guessed, the most challenging parts were animations. And animations were tricky because As you know, Flutter uses kind of unique approach to the animations. It's not like you do those in iOS or Android. And the tween class that is used in Flutter in order to define the animation is kind of limited, and I'll cover it a little bit later. And the layout was a challenge because one part of our basically user audience are designers, and it didn't seem exactly right for us to make them learn all about the Flexbox systems, how to make rows, columns, how to organize that stuff. So we came up with our own engine that takes rules, which are similar to the Sketch responsivity rules or XD, and converts those into a set of rows, columns, and all the wrappers I've mentioned earlier. So let's talk about the animations in depth. Firstly, I would like to briefly cover how animations work in Flutter. The core is the tween object, which is a simple from value to value, which is used for defining the animation, can be colors, doubles, offsets, etc. Then you call the animate method on the tween, which accepts the animation controller object, which you can then use to invoke the animation or set the duration, stuff like that. And when you use the same animation controller for several tweens, you can also define stuff like intervals for each individual tween, which will allow you to run the tween in certain period of time during the animation, not to just cover the entire animation, which Flutter names as staggered animations. Now, the problem for us was that, as you can see down below, this is a screenshot from SuperNova. This is what animation editor looks like, and as you can see, the small rectangles to the right are the keyframes, and we allow users to define unlimited number of keyframes, which Flutter didn't support. You can only define animations with tweens, which are basically a two keyframe object, begin and end. And we had to come up with our own solution to define such complex animations. So we had to introduce the concept of a keyframe into the Flutter animation framework. Keyframe is basically a simple key value pair, key being the time fraction of the animation, and the value is the value of the animation at the given time. And we also had to introduce the interpolation object, which is a replacement for a tween. Instead of just defining the begin and end, with interpolation you can define unlimited number of keyframes placed into the keyframes array. And since the interpolation object uses the same interface as the tween, the rest stays the same. You can basically call the animation, call the animate with animation controller. You can use curves, you can use intervals, and so on, as you do normally with the tween. Here is what a keyframe animation looks like. It's a bouncing animation from SuperNova. As you can see, the fraction always takes a value between 0 and 1, and the actual duration is always defined in the animation controller, and the values in this case are double. This is kind of similar to what tween looks like, and as you can see there right in the middle, the line animate, curved animation. You can use curves, intervals, and so on with this thing. We kind of like the approach, so we created a open source library, which is not intended 100% intended to use with SuperNova. You can use it on your own in case you want to define such more complicated animations yourself. And there is the link to the GitHub repository. The next thing is layout. And as I mentioned earlier, let's first talk about how layout works in Flutter. On the right, you can see a simple example from the app we usually did before. This is basically how you define layouts in Flutter, right? So you use a certain combination of columns and rows. Column just put widgets right next to each other vertically. Rows do the same horizontally, and stack layers them on top of one each other. This definition was the issue for us. We didn't want the designers to learn how to create all the needed containers for the prototype. Instead, what we are using in SuperNova is more kind of like Sketch or XD inspired system, where you can drag any component anywhere. You can place it anywhere. You can resize them as you want, and the responsivity rules are forced by the edge pins, as you can see down there. You can basically pin each component to the top, left, bottom, right, or to the center, vertically or horizontally. And this is all the original or input information that we had for making the Flutter layout. So what we did there is the Flutter layout generator, which analyzes all your positions of all your components on the screen and takes in all the rules that you've applied through SuperNova and generates minimal required set of rows, columns, and stacks in order to position your widgets and apply the same responsivity rules as you've defined in the SuperNova. So let me show you on a quick example how it works. This is a card from earlier from the example. So basically, it starts with finding all the stacks in the structure. So it basically looks at the card and defines that the bottom rectangle, the white one, should be one layer of the stack, and the rest should be another layer of the stack. Basically, how it works, it just tries its best to create layers where each layer doesn't contain any overlapping components. So next thing it does, it takes each layer and runs a analysis of your components' positions and creates rows and columns in each stack layer. So you can see, as you can see here, the red rectangle, the red border rectangle is fairly simple. It doesn't have any components in it, so it can be just the container. The content, on the other hand, has some content that has to be stacked vertically in order to achieve the same appearance as you can see it in the SuperNova preview. And then after this is done, it takes the pins, all the pins you've defined in the SuperNova, and generates the layout rules. So basically, in this case, as you have most of the components stretched vertically, it will apply the main axis alignment stretch. This little October 21, 2019 will have to be aligned to the left. So it will use align wrapper with alignment top left, and it will use containers with defined width and height in order to make the widgets have the desired dimensions on your screen. So this is like quick overview of the layout generator in SuperNova. That's it from my side. If you got any questions, let us know. Usually we'll answer those as well.
Yeah, if you want to do a quick QA session, you can do that. If you want to go home, on the other hand.
No, it was never going home to the pub.
Or we can actually run the app, right? Spustíme tu apku, ne?
Right, so
Yeah,
we must have some questions for these guys because they've built a pretty amazing tool, really. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, questions?
Hi. Is this a native app? Is it Mac OS only
Yes.
right
Yes.
now?
So, if it doesn't leave this room. Okay. So we are actually thinking, first of all, it is a macOS only application at this point, right? I think all the design editors nowadays or tools like this will start as macOS only if you build, unless you build something like a cloud solution. I think we have approached a point in SuperNova where we are starting to try to get to enterprises. And at that point, we are actually starting to think that it is hurting us a bit to be a macOS only tool. And we have, in fact, started to work on different implementation of SuperNova, which will allow you to do different things, but it will also be cross-platform. Though I cannot say when it will be done, because currently SuperNova is like 1 million lines of code. And of course, that takes time to rebuild from scratch.
Yep, sure. Oh, I
I mean, I was curious.
I guess, yeah.
Okay, so imagine you have a button on one screen and the same button on another screen. Is SuperNova able to tell that they're the same button?
Yes, it is able to tell, but no, it is not able to generate the reusable. I don't have a mic.
Yeah, well, I can answer the question. Yeah, so, all right, go on.
Sorry. So, reusable components, we can actually identify them because most of the times we do that analysis anyway. That information is also usually contained in symbols. Like if you are using sketch symbols, they are usually meant to be reusable. So in one of the actually, the next version will bring support for style guides, which is one of the reusable components that you really need to have in order to fully reuse components. And then one of the other ones will actually bring reusable components, which will be then, I suppose, generated as widgets or something like that. Yeah. He is responsible for implementing the Flutter exporter, so yeah.
While exporting the project to Flutter, are you generating any test file or basic test configuration or test files for animation or something?
So, if I understood it correctly, I think there is a lot of customization in SuperNova that you can define. I will be completely clear. I didn't hear properly. So,
Flutter project, are you creating any test file?
Oh, test files. Yeah. Well, so there is a directory called test. So if you consider that, but no, not at this point. We would like to fully automate the creation of the interfaces, and then once we have that, we would like to cover them with automated UI tests. And once we go to automation of like backend generation, well, not the backend generation, but integrations, then we would like to have those integrated as well. I think this goes to what we've been saying, that we really want to automate the boring stuff that no one likes to do. In fact, if you want to know, project like SuperNova is really hard to test. So we wrote like automated tests for ourselves, and we have like our own generator that generates the code using the SuperNova generator in Swift, and makes unit tests for us. So we have like 100,000 unit tests just generated on fly. So that's something interesting.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was quite nice and, of course, a very good idea. My question is, SuperNova's architecture is quite closed, or it's open or flexible? For example, if I want, you talk about unit test or something else. If I get something and I want to make some extension to it, so can I write a plugin and deploy in it and extend the functionality or not?
So from the beginning, we have been creating SuperNova with the idea that eventually we will open it to developers, not in like that we will show you the source code, but to give you the option to add plugins in a similar way as Sketch does it or something like that. However, if you ever worked with Sketch, you know that those plugins are super fragile because they don't really have unified API or something. What is also a bit difficult with SuperNova is that it is actually surprisingly hard to explain to developers how that system works, right? And to add proper connectors to it. You cannot just add, like, generate me one line of code there because it can potentially break the entire code base. So we are working on the plugins, but I can tell you that it's coming. But I think with most of the questions that you will give me, it is that we've been already thinking about it. It's a matter of time and resources for us at this point.
Yes, for plugins, one more second. Basically, what we're planning on doing with plugins is that mostly it's going to be, at the first version, it's going to be custom components. Basically, whatever library there is, UI library for any of the platforms that we support, we are planning on adding plugins so that you can teach SuperNova how to use your libraries, your custom components, and make it available for everyone, so everyone can use it inside SuperNova.
Yeah, so, hey, I just wanted to ask how advanced are animations in SuperNova, what you can do. And the second question is, if I generate the Flutter code and then put inside like the connections to provider or blog, how this code will be sync with the studio?
So we will give you a demo of animation. We'll give you a demo of animation editor if you want to, like 2 minutes. I actually forgot to show it to you, but Artem can do that.
Right.
This is like our tutorial project. It's called Spacebook. That means Facebook 30 years into the future. They are definitely going there. So you can basically try everything SuperNova has to offer.
Does it? Well, let me actually switch to the light version.
Yeah.
It's gonna be. Where is it?
It's
visual.
It's in a view.
Yeah. All right. Next launch.
It's surprisingly difficult to create a real-time switching if the entire project is built in Swift.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So here you can basically create an animation on any of the components you have in the screen structure. Right now I have one animation set up, which indicates the icon over here, but I can go ahead and create some new. So first of all, I have to create an animation trigger, which means basically the event that needs to happen in order to animation to start. And then I can choose any of the components on the screen. Let's say I want to animate the space book title. And there are several template animations. It's took from CSS library.
Yeah, from the animate library.
Yeah. So yeah, basically simple bounce in, bounce out, stuff like that. If I choose the template, it already set up the animation in the editor for me. I can just hit play, and you can see it plays. So as I've mentioned earlier, the animated widgets have to be exported into separate classes in SuperNova, and for each animated widget you get a separate file with a widget, and here is the animation defined as I've set it up. I can go ahead and make this one animatable with a custom animation. Say I wanna scale it, for example, and then I go there, add one keyframe at the beginning, and say second one at time of 2 seconds. Yeah. Scale.
But to answer your question, basically any property you can set on the component can be animated.
Yeah, basically here is the list of the animatable properties on each component, which is some appearance, transformation, and shadow. Yeah.
You can also do chained animations, so you don't really have to animate just one component. Trigger is always just one, but the trigger can animate different components. So if you want, just animate multiple ones.
Yep.
What you cannot do right now are transitions between screens. You cannot animate those just yet. It is extremely complicated to code it by hand, let alone generate code for it. But we would very much like to have something like that in the future. I, for example, like the animations that Airbnb has. If every developer can do that, that would be awesome. But not everyone has a team of 50 people doing just animations. So. Did that answer your question? Thanks.
Who's next?
Thanks, guys. Great tool. I think one question that was almost asked before was how do you keep the code in sync? So, for example, I'm thinking about the workflow of app development. You would bring all your assets and everything in from SuperNova. You would then start editing the code inside your app. You would add logic, APIs, all sorts of things. How does the syncing part of code to SuperNova work?
Well, so obviously the most difficult question for the end. The code synchronization is a really difficult topic. We are basically right now cheating. For example, for iOS, you have the options. You have a few options that you can choose from. One of which is that you export two classes. The first one is constantly regenerated by SuperNova. Second one extends the first one, and that is where you write your code, right? So it doesn't get overridden. In Flutter, we are actually thinking about ways how to do that, and that is also why we are here. We would very much like to know all the ways how people think they can integrate on code. Ultimately, we would like to get to a point where this hot reload can keep off the track of the changes you did, right? Because we already know the initial state which we generated, so we can actually do diffing. But developers are creative and they can do a lot of stuff with the code, and you obviously cannot do destructive actions, right? If we run this analysis on like a production code base, it could potentially break something very important. So we are thinking about ways how to do that, one of which would be similar to Git, where you would agree to what changes SuperNova is doing and do something like that. But for now, there are workarounds which you can configure in the export settings, which are mostly of that style. Once we also export the widgets, the reusable components, that alleviates that problem a bit, because then the code is more structured than it is now.
Hi. First of all, nice tool. And secondly, my question is, what I've seen so far is that you can basically have statical components like buttons and then just transform the design into code. But what is about a button, for example, which has a counter on it, and you press on it that it's reactively, or is it the right word? I'm not sure. Counting upwards, like increment itself. Is it possible in this way? Like you have a button with 0 and you just press on it, it gets 1, 2, 3, and so.
So I think that goes to what I was saying, that we are right now a interface-oriented tool, and so you cannot do that, right? Because that requires you to basically make a sort of basic logic in SuperNova. Ultimately, maybe down the road, but I think with the roadmap that we have, it will not happen anytime soon.
So basically for that, our vision is that we do the UI part for you, and you can do whatever you want with the UI after you hit the export button. Basically, either that or API connection or database connection or whatever. We are basically trying our best to export it in a way that it's pluggable in like any, as generic as it can get, pretty much.
Anyone? So I know the guys are looking for feedback from us as well. They want to know how we can improve the app, their app in particular. Like, if you've got any ideas, like, you know, really this is the opportunity to help them tune this as well, because they are looking to us to give them guidance. Anyone?
I have one more thing to say. If you like SuperNova, you can go to supernova.io, download it. We have a free trial, so you can play around with it. And if you like it very much, then use a Flutter London code, which will give you a 75% discount for a year for SuperNova.
So if you're too shy to talk